Bretonnia is a land of chivalrous knights, syphilitic peasants, unicorns, and pegasi. It's like someone booted up the game Heroes of Might and Magic 1 and said, oh, this will make for a great tabletop army. Well, now that I think about it, I think that game came out way after Warhammer 1. Jokes aside, we all know that Bretonnia is very near and dear to my heart as the very first army I ever touched of any Games Workshop products. But attached to that is a beautiful history that mirrors the Arthurian legends of old. Since that story is also near and dear to me, you can understand how the information and unification of Bretonnia is a rather nostalgic subject. In today's video, we're going to talk about the early history of the Bretonnia tribe, all the way up to the Wars of Unification and subsequent rule by the first king of Bretonnia, Gilles le Breton. We'll talk about kingdoms that are no longer a part of Bretonnia and some of the very first Grail Knights, so join me in our dive into the history of the land of the Lady. And that land, Bretonnia, gets its name from the earliest tribes of man that migrated from the east to escape the endless green tide of greenskins. Most settled in the land we know to be the Empire, but some traveled further west, over the Grey Mountains into an ancient land of rolling green hills, plentiful forests, and crystal beaches, a land that once belonged to the High Elves before the War of Vengeance. The Bretonnia settled in what would become Bretonnia, displacing the indigenous agricultural people that worshipped the druidic old faiths. With Sigmar's eventual rise and unification of the Empire, he beckoned the Bretonnia to join the newly formed nation. The Bretonnia refused on the basis that their cultures were too different and they would never bend the knee to a foreign ruler. And it's true. I mean, the people of the Bretonnia had an interesting system where the strongest and most capable youth of the town was armed and armored in the finest the people had to offer. In exchange, the youth would watch over the town from a watchtower, day in and day out. And he was thrown grand feasts and given the best lodgings available, being dubbed a knight. And over time, this developed into the feudal system we see today throughout Bretonnia. These knights rose up to become kings or warlords, renaming themselves dukes and their charges as dukedoms. For it was the duke's purpose to safeguard the people, no matter how high the stakes were. Thus was born the true measure of knighthood across the nascent kingdom. And eventually 16 total dukedoms rose up across Bretonnia, or Bretonnia, the lands of Bretonnia, from places like Mousillon, Bordelot, and Montfort to the lost kingdoms such as Selous and Glamboreal. Trade had prospered in these lands as well, opening up channels with the dwarfs of the Grey Mountains, who in turn taught the early Bretonnia how to craft armor and weapons worthy of knights. By the year 930 IC, Bretonnia was not much different than the Bretonnia that we have today, plus or minus a few kingdoms and their autonomy, of course. But in that very same year came a large orc invasion under orc war boss Garabad, from the mountains of massive Orkle in the center of the Bretonnia lands. Rallying to the cause of the people, the Knights of Selous charged headlong into the orc hordes, slaying more and more greenskins with each heroic charge, but with each charge, less knights returned to charge again, and over time, the last of the Knights of Selous were cut down by the greenskins, who then ravaged through the lands of Selous. The barons of Quesnel and Brionne rode out to end the greenskin threat. Putting the army to rout, they then quarreled over who would take the lands of Selous. Rather than fighting an all-out war, the matter was settled over an honorable duel. Quesnel won the duel, slaying the Lord of Brionne and expanding their lands north into the forest of Chalon and onto the border of Paravon. In time, more invasions occurred across the land, and in 932 IC, the Duke of Brionne fought another force from war boss Bragabad. Slaying the warlord in single combat, Balduin, the new Duke of Brionne, fought the entire battle with Garagabad's battle axe lodged in his shield. This would go on to become the black axe on white field that is the heraldry of Brionne to this day. A mere 16 years later, the northern portions of the Bretonnia were overrun by Norscan raiders, sweeping down through Lyonesse and Couronne, harrying the forest of the Ardennes. And around the same time, the western shores of the Bretonnia were under attack by Cetra the Imperishable, forcing Bordelot, Aquitaine, and Mousillon to fight the undead invaders. By 974 IC, the Bretonnia were beset on all sides by enemies. Goblins had poured out from the Grey Mountains to the south and east, attacking both Carcassonne and the lands of Glamboreal, which ran up against the forests of Athel-Loren. Glamboreal was completely overrun, cut off from aid from neighboring Carcassonne and Quesnel to the north. Summersfall Fort and the regions east of the river Surthrel make up the former lands of Glan Boreal, which are now incorporated into Carcassonne. You have to remember that the Bretonnia were a fractured people at this time, operating very much like Greek city-states or the Sengoku period of Japan. They did not owe allegiances to anyone but themselves. Individually, a knight was stronger than almost all these foes, right? But for each knight, there were 10 Norskins, Greenskins, goblins, or skeletons. The numbers were just too much for a divided kingdom. While there were relief forces that would go to a kingdom's aid, it was mainly in the scope of self-interest. Hope had seemed lost. But the horn of Helm Hammerhand would sound in the deep one last time. Gilles le Breton, the Duke of Baston, who had personally slain Smirgus, the Red Worm, in the forest of Chalon, rose to the occasion. Ever wonder why Baston's heraldry is a red dragon on a yellow field? Well, like now you know. It's because of this gigantic badass whose monumental testicles were hardly contained inside of the shrink wrap that was the chainmail at his waist. Gilles believed in a unified nation. It was the only way to combat the foes at the Bretonnia's steppes. The Duke rallied Therulf de Lyonesse to his banner first, convincing him of the glory of a unified Bretonnia. Second, his closest friend, and the Lancelot of our tale, minus the whole adultery thing, Landuin de Moussillon, the man who was said to be the fairest and best knight in the land. The three rode out, their armies in tow, under a crusade banner to slay one of the largest greenskin armies in all of the kingdom. A massive orc Wa had gathered around the mountains of massive Orc Hall once more. Meeting the foe on the battlefield, the poorly organized Bretonnia army was badly beaten in their first engagement. Now, the men of the Bretonnia were not used to fighting in a large, cohesive unit. They were used to listening to one commander, and that was it. This spelled doom as the disorganized army was beaten back by the orcs. Setting up camp in the forest of Chalon, the Brotherhood of Three Knights sought peace by the side of a serene lake deep in the forest. Taking stock of the situation, they were sure that the battle the next morning would be their last, but they would see it through nonetheless. Such is the perseverance and honor of the knighthood of the Bretonnia. As they rested and prayed, Gilles went to draw water from the lake. In that moment, a ghostly vision of a divine being arose from the lake, enchanting the three warriors and blessing Gilles le Breton's personal banner with her likeness. This excerpt from the 6th edition Bretonnia Army Book beautifully details the event. The knights knew full well that the sublime apparition was no mortal creature, for nary a ripple disturbed the waves. She gifted her bounty and her blessing unto Gilles, enchanting his banner with her likeness. The bodies of the companions became suffused with unearthly strength and light. Their eyes did glow with lambent flame from within, and their weapons and armor shone with new power. Thus did Gilles, Landuin, and Therulf transcend the mortal clay and earn sanctity to become the first of the Grail Knights, the famed companions of the Grail. As the book says, thus the Grail Knights are born. Each one of their arms and armor gleamed with new light as they purified it in the waters of the lake of the Lady of the Lake. The lady offered an ornate chalice to each of the dukes, bestowing them with great strength and a new faith in their new patroness, the lady. As the sun rose on the battlefield that morning, the army of the Bretonnia met with the Orc army. The greenskin army stretched back beyond the horizon, choking the land with the shouting braying of the green tide. And the Bretonnia charged on, undeterred and filled with righteous vindication. And in a scene straight out of the Lord of the Rings, the companions cleaved down the orc lines, sundering their formations and pushing deeper and deeper into the Vermilion horde. As the day drew to a close, the Bretonnia had won a heroic victory, utterly shattering the army and taking very few casualties themselves. This moment is absolutely huge, as this is the true birthplace of the Kingdom of Bretonnia. Retiring to the sacred lake, the dukes present appointed Gilles the leader of battles, essentially giving Gilles authority over everything: the army, each liberated dukedom, and all their resources. There are things sort of like a Julius Caesar, but without the backstabbing and et tu brute moments. This is where the Arthurian legend really kicks off. If you've seen the 80s movie Excalibur, you have this moment that mirrors it quite well, where Gilles traverses the land, drawing more and more noble dukes to his banner. Before we go further on the unification of Bretonnia, I want to talk about the number 14. 14 has a ton of significance in the underlying lore of Bretonnia. Aside from it being the age in which I learned that you aren't supposed to swallow lollipops whole, it extends to almost every facet of Bretonnia life. There were 14 companions, there are 14 virtues, there are only 14 holy weapons of the lady, which each one is wielded by the companions. There are 14 great fiefs, 12 dukedoms after some are rolled into each other and what we kind of get with current-day Bretonnia, but so on and so forth. In the video I have coming on the 14 virtues, you might get sick of hearing that number, but just know that it is important, and hence the very heavy emphasis on it. Let's get back on track. With the central portion of the lands of the Bretonnia now unified under one banner, and the start of Bretonnia, Gilles and his companions expand outward to bring more of the Bretonnia into the fold. Moving to the west and attacking the orcs besieging Bordeloo in the rear, Marcus de Bordeloo and Friedmund de Aquitaine were all too eager to join up with Gilles. After their great victory, the Lady of the Lake visited the companions and bade Marcus and Friedmund to sup from the Holy Grail, becoming the 4th and 5th Grail companions. Riding south, the Grail army attacking the orc warlord Brockgar. Friedmund used his flock of falcons to clear the skies, while Landuin personally slew Brockgar so that the army could hurry to the capital Brionne to relieve the siege of the castle. Lord Balduin de Brionne sallied out from the castle as Gilles' army crashed into the rear of the orc army. In a pure moment of Warhammer 40,000 awesomeness, the two met up at the center of the field of battle, grasped forearms, shouting "Brother!" so loudly that it echoed across time and space, implanting the nascent Imperium of Man with the chant that would become the call sign of all Space Marines for millennia to come. Or maybe not, I just got ahead of myself. But outnumbered 300 to 1, the Grail army was able to rout the entire Greenskin force, and solidified another dukedom for the growing Bretonnia. Balduin then drank from the Grail and became the 6th Grail champion. To the east, Gilles and his knights rode to the dukedom of Carcassonne. Carcassonne had been besieged for years at this point, with the adjoining dukedom completely destroyed. They pushed onwards towards the dukedom of Quesnel, where they were joined by Lambert de Carcassonne, rallying to Gilles' army and combining their forces. And as they crossed the border into Quesnel, the forest of Lorraine was being ravaged by another orc army, flames and destruction spreading from the outside in. There was a legend that pervaded the land of a terrifying aspect of the forest, the Fey Enchantress. Many of the knights were so terrified of her that they were unwilling to enter the forest of Lorraine. Gilles would not have it, and after chugging a box of wine and crushing it on his head, he slurred something about the lady and rallied his men to charge into the forest. There they were ambushed by the orcs. The Fey Enchantress brought the forest to life to help the fledgling Bretonnians, smashing orcs and aiding the knights. Lastly, Raedmund the Pure, the Duke of Quesnel, arrived for the old patented Bretonnian pincer attack. Together they slew the last of the orcs and drove them from the land. The lady then blessed Lambard and Raedmund, making them the 7th and 8th Grail companions. With the southern realms of Bretonnia now pretty secure, it was time for the Grail army to expand northward. The first dukedom on that expansion, north at least, was Paravorn, which had been completely destroyed by some pissed-off giants throwing boulders down at the city while goblins looted the capital city. Agelar de Paravone aided Gilles in retaking the city, commanding the skies upon his glorious Pegasus Glorfindel, not to be confused with Glorfindel from the Lord of the Rings, but a funny sight nonetheless. Agelar's army, or Agelar's army, joined the Grail army as they marched to the northwest towards Montfort. And you think I'm going to say that Gilles' army attacked the besieging Greenskin army in the rear? Well, then you'd be absolutely correct and have probably noticed a growing trend in this history thus far. But this time was different, though. While the righteous fury of the lady was meted out to the Greenskins, Gilles le Breton was struck in the chest by a bolt from a goblin bolt thrower. Gilles' warhorse strained under the combined weight of the leader of battles and his gigantic balls as the champion of the lady continued to fight all the way towards the city, where he met with Martu de Montfort before his wounds saw him collapse. Martu and Agelar stood by Gilles on his sickbed, watching over their savior. In the night, the Lady of the Lake came to them, healing Gilles and blessing Martu and Agelar for their staunch vigilance and dedication to the leader of the companions. Thus the Lord of Paravorn and Lord of Montfort became the 9th and 10th Grail companions, and joined Gilles in breaking the siege by sallying out from the gates, all 10 companions in tow. Gilles then took the fight directly to the goblins, taking his companions to hack and slash to the caves that dotted the mountainside, striking down goblin kings and destroying the cohesion of the Greenskins in southern Bretonnia. Moving further west, the Grail army marched into Gisaro, Meeting Baron de Gisero, the Grail army charged headlong into another greenskin army. Protected by the blessings of the Lady, the knights were able to deflect any harmful magics cast upon them before riding the armies befouling Gisero down. Pushing to the westernmost coast of the land, the Bretonnia army made for the Duchy of Mousillon, Landuin's home. Now, we all know Mousillon to be this damned, dark, and dank land of all sorts of fell magic, but it was not always that way. The land was once as fair as Landuin himself, one of the most beautiful realms in all the great lands of the Bretonnia. But many years of pillaging and ransacking by beastmen, orcs, and undead had turned the once green rolling hills into a desolate wasteland. As the army entered the dreary city of Mousillon, they were greeted by Fuljar de Artois. Fuljar, after hearing too many jokes about coffee, joined up with the Grail army, but warned Gilles of an impending army of both undead and beastmen that would be upon the city within the hour. Taking to the defenses of the city, the companions bravely rode out toward the oncoming combined evil forces. The Grail companions each slew one of the mighty champions of the army, be it a wight, necromancer, or beastman. They all fell before the valor of the Bretonnia. Landuin himself ended the conflict by slaying the necromancer controlling the undead forces. This put the beastmen to rout as half the army vanished into dust. The Lady then rewarded Baron and Fuljar for their services, making them the 11th and 12th Grail companions. At this point, almost every major dukedom and duchy of the lands of the Bretonnia were now under Gilles' direct control. The only things that remained were two final cities to the north. Marching on Liangui, the companions came across an army that was not greenskins for a change. The invading Norskin forces that we had mentioned before were besieging Liangui, reinforced greatly by Chaos Warriors. Cordun of Liangui sallied out from the city and met up with Gilles le Breton, adding his sword to the army and seemingly abandoning his city. But that's not here nor there, right? Marcus, the Grail companion out of Bordeloo, then challenged the Norse leader, Svengar of the Scalings, to a duel. And we all know the long-standing tradition of saving face and looking like the biggest badass in the north, though naturally a Norskin would not bow out of this duel. The condition was simple: whoever lost would withdraw their forces. And this made for a titanic duel, and it's one of my favorite pictures from the lore at the time. The two dueled atop a lighthouse overlooking Liangui. For an entire day they traded blows, Marcus infused with the blessings of the Lady and given supernatural might, Svengar steeped deeply in the tainted strength of the Chaos Gods. Twin hammers coursed through the air wildly at Marcus, barely able to deflect blows and dodge out of the way. Through the night, the sounds of their weapons meeting could be heard as both armies looked on at their respective champion. As the dawn broke, Marcus's strength surged anew, and he launched himself at the Norskin champion, striking too quickly for Svengar to regain his footing. He was driven backward. Parrying one hammer, then deflecting the other, Marcus exposed the Scaling's guard. Raising his sword high above his head, he cleaved downward with such might that it split the chieftain completely in half, both flanks of man falling to the rocks below. Keeping their word, the Norskins took to their ships and left the lands of the Bretonnia in awe of the warrior skills of the people of Bretonnia. Traveling east, the Grail army met up with Kerleon de Coron, who immediately joined with the army to march on the orcs at the River Sunez. There they won another massive victory for Bretonnia and returned to the city of Coron to reconsolidate. As the men got their much-needed rest, word came of an army of beastmen, trolls, and other misshapen beings of chaos pouring out from the forest of Ardennes. Following that, another messenger brought word of an army of greenskins coming down from the Pale Sisters. And just as the knights were ready to meet their foes, Skaven erupted from the sewers and undernetworks of Coron, attacking everything in sight. Taking counsel on what to do next, the Lady met with all the gathered companions, blessing both Corduin and Kerleon, making them the final 13th and 14th Grail companions. The circle is now complete, as Darth Vader would say. She then went on to bless the entire army, inspiring common and noble alike to fight in her name. Hopped up on grape juice and religious fervor, the people of the Bretonnia fought with valor and courage that has not been seen since. Having their own battle of the five armies, the Knights of Bretonnia rode down the armies coming from the Ardennes. As the Greenskins charged from the Pale Sisters, they splintered upon the bulwark of the combined might of Bretonnia. The Skaven were put to the sword quickly after, as Bretonnia finally rid herself of over 50 years of invasions, marauding, and destruction from foreign invaders. In 978 IC, Gilles le Breton was dubbed the first Royarch, or King of Bretonnia, with the blessing from the Fey Enchantress standing in for the Lady of the Lake. Gilles the Uniter would go on to reign for 17 more years, bringing peace to the land of the newly created Bretonnian kingdom. All 12 of the dukedoms would serve under the Royarch, the 14 companions each serving their true lord. Sadly, in 995 IC, Gilles le Breton was laid low by an axe thrown by an orc war boss with his dying breath. Lodged deep into the king's chest, he collapsed to the ground, and as he faded in and out of consciousness, he was granted a vision by the Lady of the Lake. He bade his companions to bring him to the nearby lake as they fought on the outskirts of Athel-Loren. As they approached the lake, a small ship came from the mist, the lady at the helm. They loaded Gilles aboard the ship so that his journey to sainthood, as the book puts it, could be complete. The lady departed with Gilles as the companions looked on, each one weeping for their fallen king. So passes Gilles le Breton, the uniter and first Royarch of Bretonnia. And this begins the legend that Gilles will return to Bretonnia in a time of dire need, when Bretonnia needs him the most. Then, in a fit of pure Arthurian fetish porn, he absolutely does during the end times. The Green Knight reveals himself to be Gilles le Breton, killing Malbod the Serpent and returning Bretonnia to her former glory. Well, or somewhat. Even in the direst, worst part of the end times, Abhorrash and Gilles fight back to back to keep the land intact for as long as possible. The end time goes on to say that Lowen and Gilles are supposed to have ascended to godhood, but we've yet to see that in the Age of Sigmar. After Gilles' death, there is a lot of talk in the kingdom on who would inherit the title of king. Should it be Louis, Gilles' son, Marcus the Wise, Landwin the Fair, Tyrulf? Each one has their own claim. In the end, the decision is made that it would go to Louis. But the decision was also made that no claimant to the throne could ascend to Royarch unless they were a full-fledged Grail Knight, despite lineage. This spurs Louis into taking up the quest for the Grail, and actually starts the tradition of the questing knights. And once he returns from his quest, Louis the Rash, as he is dubbed, displays that he has ascended to the status of Grail Knight. This is obvious from his blonde hair, blue eyes, and static electricity that courses over his armor. Oh shit, wait, no, sorry. That's Dragon Ball Z, wrong lore. Either way, Louis sets forth the same tenets and code of conduct that the companions lived under. Deep in the hall of Louis' home of Brionne is a tattered manuscript of the code of conduct of a knight that Gilles himself applied. The chivalric code is born and implemented across the kingdom. Thus the traditions of the knight-errant, knights of the realm, questing knights, and Grail Knights are adapted much in the same way we see them today. Louis set up the Golden Age that would then lead to the errantry wars into Araby, and all the many events that unfold across the grander history of Bretonnia. But this is really the true end of the start of everything. It doesn't just end with Gilles' death, but with the legacy he creates in his son. Grail chapels and places of worship sprout across the kingdom. Louis cements a lasting treaty and alliance with the Wood Elves of Athel-Loren, promising that no Bretonnian will trespass in their lands as long as the Wood Elves rally to any common enemies. So from this, we have a Bretonnia that we see in the final days of the Warhammer world. This holy land of chivalrous knights that ride out to defend the weak and weary from the chaos and tyranny of the many terrors of the time. And you can see why I have such a nostalgic romanticizing of the Bretonnian culture. It's something I've always been smitten with. It's that over-the-top and knightly valor that colored so many of my childhood, or so much of my childhood, that I also swoon over when I look back at the army book, read the lore, or regale in it. Ironically enough, after the end times, the peasants of Bretonnia that would fall victim to the many plagues of the end times would become the Flesh Eater's Court, a direct mockery of the life they led as Bretonnians. And we've still yet to see Bretonnia in Age of Sigmar, or in any real incarnation for that matter, so hopefully we will. My big wet dream is to see a race of holy vampire warriors, right? Like Gilles le Breton and Abhorrash's forces combining. My personal headcanon tells me that something awesome had to happen during the end times, or during the end of it all, when Abhorrash and his Blood Knights were told to feed on Gilles and his Grail Knights to suffuse them with the Lady's blessing, but also granting the Grail Knights the vampire's immortality. I don't know, that kind of sounds really weird, but also super awesome to me. But no matter how you fight it, oh man, that was fucking terrible. Bretonnia has a rich history that has gone on to affect the greater Warhammer world in so many ways. Thank you so much for joining me here on this journey here today, and I hope you learned a bit more about Bretonnia and why they squeal about the lady at every chance that they get. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a good one and take care.